December 5th, 1944. A frozen clearing outside the village of Bullingen, Ardennes. Brittle fog coiling over churned earth. The trees stripped to skeletons. The wind tasted of coal smoke and something metallic. The tang of coolant mixed with the acrid residue of spent cordite. Unteroffizier Müller hugged his collar against the cold breath puffing white, while Oberfeldwebel, Karl Heinemann, grease under his nails and a cigarette stub between his teeth, peered through the gloom at a shape that refused to look like any German vehicle he'd learned to trust. It was small. It was obscene in its smallness. At first light, the captured Willys, open-topped olive-drab canvas flapping, sat like an impotent child between two hulking staffs of 251 half-tracks. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, hands clasped tight around his cap, barked an order, and the squad closed in. To the Panzer Grenadiers, who had spent months coaxing life back into blown engines and rebuilding torsion bar suspensions under shell fire, the Jeep looked fragile, a toy. They called it Das Spielzeug in low, half-amused voices. The Kugelwaren, the Type 82 they had all driven and cursed, was at least a known quantity. A boxy, sometimes unreliable workhorse cobbled from pre-war parts and German ingenuity. This American thing, with its stubby hood and round headlights like astonished eyes, seemed an affront. Heinemann ran a finger along the stamped steel. There were no arcane welds, no finicky brass fittings to be wrestled with, just sheet metal, simple hinges, and a hood release that clicked with satisfying precision. He dropped to his knees, reached under, and found the filter and the magneto access, like a mechanic reading a well-translated manual. "Easy," he muttered, almost to himself, and the cigarette fell from his lips. The first test was practical and merciless. A supply run needed to cross a field riddled with shell holes and frozen ruts. The Kugelwaren had already been bogged twice. The half-tracks could not squeeze through the hedgerows without drawing fire. Bauer barked. "Müller, take it. Quickly." Müller climbed in, fingers stumbling over unfamiliar levers. The wheel felt too small under his palms. He thumbed the starter. The engine caught with a deep, honest clatter and a smell like hot oil and old leather. It was no smooth German six. It was a gutsy flathead that barked and wanted to move. Heinemann watched the Jeep climb the first ridge like a goat, front wheels skittering over frozen cloths, rear axle biting without protest. When Müller returned 30 minutes later, his face had changed. Where skepticism had sat was now a hard, grudging respect. "It simply went," he said, "through mud where the Kugelwaren pulled and stalled. No whining, no fiddling. You punch the throttle, and it takes you." Word spread. Officers collected around the captured vehicle, inspecting the stamped part numbers, peering under the chassis. A corporal from the maintenance company, a meticulous man named Jürgen Ulrich, began cataloging bolts, noting the American punch-in for interchangeable parts and standardized fasteners. He held up a washer and whistled. "One size fits many things. No special tools, or you don't need to be a lathe operator to make a field repair." That realization landed like a blow. The Wehrmacht's supply culture was one of custom parts in carefully monitored workshops. The Jeep's parts were cheap, simple, and crucially abundant if you could get them. By dusk, the mood had shifted. The Jeep, once a laughing curiosity, had become a prize to be fenced and cataloged. Mechanics joked about trading a set of magnetos for it. Commanders scribbled notes into their logs. Heinemann, who had spent years cursing finicky Bosch units and temperamental carburetors in the Kugelwaren, sat on the running board and traced a greasy finger along the frame. He imagined using one in a reconnaissance patrol, light, nimble, easy to hide, and easy to keep running on the scantiest of parts. Outside, the wind rose, pressing its teeth into the trees. Men moved between trucks and half-tracks, whispering and planning in the way soldiers do when a small, useful thing promises advantage. The Jeep had not yet rewritten doctrine, but it had cracked confidence open. An admission that something foreign, stamped in American factories, could outmatch German expectations in the most unforgiving of classrooms. 2 days later, the frost gave way to rain, the kind that soaked through canvas and turned everything to brown glue. The Ardennes was dissolving. Roads vanished under muck. Trucks spun their wheels uselessly in craters, and horses strained at wagons that sunk up to their hubs. By midday, Lieutenant Bauer's column was supposed to rendezvous with an artillery battery beyond a half-collapsed bridge near the Amel River, but half his vehicles were stuck, and the Kubelvarens had become little more than stationary shelters. Every man cursed the same thing: Verdelam. Then through the downpour,
It started every morning without coaxing. It could weave through forest trails where half-tracks bogged down. It could run on low-octane fuel, or whatever they could siphon from wrecks. "Give me a Jeep over a Kubelwagen any day," one of his drivers muttered, wiping snow from the hood. And it wasn't just field units who noticed. Reports were quietly making their way up command channels. Captured American light transport vehicles show remarkable utility under varied terrain and minimal maintenance conditions. Even the SS logistics officers took note. Then came Operation Grief. In December 1944, under the direct orders of Otto Skorzeny, German commandos dressed in American uniforms were to infiltrate Allied lines during the Ardennes offensive. Their mission? Sow confusion, misdirect traffic, and sabotage communications. For this, Skorzeny demanded one thing specifically: American Jeeps. Captured ones were requisitioned from every frontline unit that had them. Mechanics hastily painted over insignia, restamped serial numbers, and adjusted headlights to American patterns. The vehicles that had once been mocked as toys were now deemed essential for one of the Reich's most daring operations. At a frozen airfield near Oss, Heinemann watched two of his Jeeps being loaded onto transport trucks for Skorzeny's use. So he muttered bitterly, "The toys go to the masquerade." Euler laughed. At least they'll get to fight their own kind. But inside, both men felt something unspoken. The Jeep was no longer a curiosity. It was a quiet humiliation. Each time it started on the first turn while their own trucks refused to budge, each time its suspension glided over terrain that crippled German machines, it whispered a truth too dangerous to say aloud. Germany's engineering brilliance had lost to American pragmatism. Weeks later, reports filtered back. The commandos had indeed used Jeeps to slip past checkpoints and sow chaos. Allied MPs in confusion fired on their own vehicles more than once. The humble little machine had turned into a weapon of deception. And as the Arda offensive crumbled, Heinemann's workshop lay strewn with abandoned vehicles, cold steel monuments to a war machine running out of fuel, parts, and time. Yet the Jeep still sat in the corner, engine ticking patiently as if waiting for its next driver, German, American, or otherwise. In the end, even as the Reich collapsed around them, the mechanics agreed on one thing: the Jeep had earned their respect. It had done what their doctrines, their blueprints, and their pride could not. It had simply worked. March 1945. The Rhine. The front was gone. Not broken, not shattered, simply gone. It existed now only as a memory of lines on maps. Retreats had become routes, and the Wehrmacht's machines, once the pride of Europe, now littered the roads like carcasses picked clean by crows. In a muddy yard outside Regen, a group of exhausted German mechanics huddled around a